ప్రేమ స్వరూపులారా, విద్యార్థులారా, who am I?
Welcome to InSAIde Scoop, a podcast that brings you practical servings of Swami's sweetest teachings. Our guest today is yet another Kiwi, a doctor training in pediatrics in Auckland, one of the National Young Adult coordinators, in fact. Welcome, Brother Nethran. I'm so happy to have you.
Thank you.
We usually start off these episodes with a segment called Third Speed Samsara, which is a game that we play. Today that is going to be connected to the topic of lies. So the game is called Two Truths, One Lie. How it will work is if you could share 3 facts about yourself, 2 that are true and 1 that is a lie, and then I'll guess which is the lie. So try not to give it away in the way that you explain the statements. Good?
Sure.
Okay, great.
Okay. Alrighty. So 2 truths and 1 lie. So I was born in New Zealand. I have never lived outside of New Zealand. And I have, I started learning vocals, so Indian classical vocals in my 20s.
So this is hard given that I don't know anything about you.
I've made it hard.
And I think I'm just going to go with the third one because you spent the most time trying to think of the third one. Is the third one a lie? I have no other way.
No, the third one's actually not a lie. It was this. It was the second one. It's kind of, even that is it's a slight white lie, I suppose. I spent in my early childhood about 6 months in Australia, when I didn't know any different. But yeah, but no. So I did live a little bit of time outside Australia, outside New Zealand, but otherwise.
You were born in New Zealand.
Yes, that's right.
Great. All right, so I can't tell when people are lying clearly.
Or maybe I'm too good at it. Hopefully not.
Oh, I don't know if that's a good thing, but yeah. So today's topic is all about lies, whether it's acceptable, in what circumstance, etc. In the spirit of honesty, let's first acknowledge that we have all lied at some point in our lives for various reasons.
Yeah.
So could you tell us what are the categories of some of the lies that we tell, if you had to categorize?
Categories of lies. So, I mean, in my mind, I would think of it as the things that are completely untrue and we kind of fabricate a truth, essentially, to fabricate a reality to cover up the actual truth. So that's one type of lie, something that's completely different. Another could be said to be hiding the truth. So the truth is one thing, and you kind of hold back certain details to create another kind of image in another person's mind, which is not the absolute truth, but you kind of, and that's how you do it, essentially. Rather than fabricating a new reality, you kind of hold back things to make something else. In my mind, those are the main things. But the overarching thing is to misrepresent what is the absolute truth, if you like. Yeah.
And then within that, I suppose there are different degrees of severity in either withholding or fabricating your reality.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. And that kind of depends on how much of an impact it has.
Right. Okay, great. So, and I suppose within those categories, those lies could be directed to others or to ourselves, right?
Yeah, or to ourselves. That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
And one could argue essentially which is the more harmful. And I suppose if you're lying to yourself, that creates a false reality for yourself. And then that can then spur you on to create false realities for others.
Yeah, it's a bit of a spiral when it's directed to ourselves. For example, when I convince myself the weighing scale is broken every time I try to wave. That is a lie.
That's a very useful lie, isn't it?
Anyway, let's dive deeper
I
into
love that one.
let's dive deeper into what you think motivates us to tell these various categories of lies. What do you think?
Yeah. What motivates us to tell lies? So it's interesting because one of the things that's kind of stuck in my mind in pediatric training is that there's one part of child development in which children start to tell lies. And the reason for that is actually they're developing a concept that their own actions and words can affect someone else's emotions.
Right.
For example, say if a 3-year-old brother hits the 2-year-old sister, and mum asks if that's what he did, he'll say no, because he knows that if mum knows that he hit sister, then mum will start getting angry. And so I wonder if the crux of lies is because there's something that we don't like in reality that we're worried that someone else won't like. That makes sense.
Right.
And we want that to not be conveyed in fear of what they might think of us, what they might think of the reality of how they might react to the situation. And we want them to react the same way. A lot of the things we do in life are all about wants and desires, isn't it? And so we want something to happen in front of us, and therefore we might withhold truth or create another reality to get that particular reaction or opinion.
Right, that's very, very interesting and helpful. And at what age do you think that development begins to take place in a child? Would you have an age?
I forgot that specific bit of information that did come off my exam. I think it's from about 3 years of age, around that time. Yeah, because before that you kind of start getting autonomy, so the child realizes that I am me and you are you, and that's around 2 years of age. And then after that they're like, oh, actually my words affect this person.
Right. So what we're essentially saying is that it stems for when we can understand perhaps the repercussions of our actions, and also the desire to want to be liked or to be regarded a certain way. Even with the child, is the desire to not get mama angry, right? That's the underlying desire. And
that's exactly it.
Right. I suppose that stems from a lot of our expectations. We start lying when we are unable to satisfy the expectations that's either been set by society or for ourselves. And I feel like we live in a world that perpetuates this need to be perfect all the time, that lying can sometimes be easier because it's not normal to be imperfect, right? So I suppose if we live in a world where we start normalizing empathy and less judgment, less filters on social media, it would be easier to just be honest about everything in life. So I guess desires and fear is the root, we're saying. Is that right?
Yeah, and that's kind of the unfortunate part as well, because you mentioned kind of the expectations that we create for ourselves as well as what society creates, and sometimes those aren't the truth either. You don't have to be slim and fair to be perfect, to look good, and it's kind of sad how that sometimes happens, and part of that is within ourselves, and part of that is the messaging that comes out around us, and how much we kind of subscribe to that messaging.
Right. Okay, awesome. So having set the context of why we lie, do you think that there are circumstances when it is acceptable to lie? And let me just clarify, acceptable here meaning acceptable from Swami's point of view or our conscience point of view. And I think we can agree that lying for personal gain, like cheating or evading taxes, that's bad. No, like completely.
Totally. Absolutely.
So let's explore the grayer categories of lying. So for example, is exaggerating on your CV or your LinkedIn acceptable?
spicy topic, isn't it? Right. Okay. So so when is lying acceptable? I personally haven't lied on my CV, but you have to figure out if that's a lie or not.
We're still playing the game.
It's in my mind, I feel like it's how much of an impact is this lie going to have? What impact is it going to have? Is it going to help someone? Is it going to hurt someone? And even when that's relating to ourselves, for example, the CV scenario, that's actually an important thing to think about, because you might put out there that you've been a CEO of a startup firm in which you were actually a manager of a small team that was right at the bottom, and you had to answer to 15,000 other people. And that might make your CV look better and make you more employable to a larger company, for example, where you want to take your next step. However, there are a few issues there, because it may put you in a difficult situation in which you're put into a role and selected for a role in which you don't have the appropriate skills, make you feel worse about yourself, lower your own confidence, and therefore lower your own career progression in that way. At the same time, then the company doesn't get what it needs from the person that they're employing. And so you're actually hurting the employer as well as yourself. And so that's something that I would, in that situation, think 10 times about. How big is this lie? Does it have a possibility of getting bigger? And is there a possibility of getting people into trouble, including yourself? Yeah. Is it for the greater good?
Yeah, really agree. And I think imposter syndrome is already so real without us lying about
God, yes.
Capable of. Can you imagine when we're lying about like our abilities? That makes it, I'm sure the syndrome just gets heightened then, like every day be like, oh, absolutely. I'm not gonna. Okay, that's very helpful. Yeah. And so the next category are white lies, like saying, I didn't finish that last piece of cake in the fridge, even though you finished the last piece of cake in the fridge. Do you think those are harmless?
Again, it depends on the situation.
Okay.
I feel, and again, the same framework probably applies here. So who is it going to impact? How is it going to impact? How much is it going to impact?
Right.
Is it going to help someone? And so that's kind of the kind of spicy kind of part of this, is that I believe that sometimes it is okay to tell lies if it's going to help someone and not hurt someone. And even white lies in which you're kind of covering up the truth can play a decent role in there. The cake in the fridge, I think you'd hurt a lot of people with that, eh? I would get hurt.
It is very frustrating when you think there is one piece of cake left in the fridge and you're fantasizing about it the whole day, and then someone else eats it and then pretends like
that's true.
That's a lot of harm, I would say.
That's a lot of harm.
Yeah.
But then there's another way to think about that, actually. And that is, what effect is the truth going to have? So Swami's talked about speaking the truth. He's also talked about speaking the palatable truth. And so if I hear that the last piece of cake is gone, and I'm going to be absolutely devastated and like sit and cry for 3 days, you might not want to tell me that and be like, I'm not sure where the last piece of cake is gone. Oh, that's unfortunate. Maybe it's still here somewhere. No, it's actually not. I don't know what's happened. Sorry. Compared to if you told me that you'd eaten it, and I'll be like, I've hold on vendetta against you forever. So it's kind of, you see what I mean? Like, how much of an impact is that going to have? And I suppose knowing the situation and knowing the possibilities and knowing the people around the situation is quite important. Okay. And so in that sense, and to be able to nuance whether to tell a lie or not is takes a lot of thought. Sometimes it's just easier to tell the truth.
Yeah. Next category is lying to refrain from hurting someone. For example, when there is a request for constructive feedback, like, okay, so this can vary. For example, if you have a friend who's going to marry someone and they ask you for your opinion on, do you think this is the right person? Or it could be something smaller, like your wife just asking you how she looks in a certain attire. So how when is it acceptable to lie in these situations?
That's an interesting question. So you mentioned constructive feedback, and that's something that I have kind of personal experience with, because in medicine, it's almost like an apprenticeship model. So we go in as a junior, work with seniors, and get constant feedback, and continuously grow in that way. And there are some situations in which people are too nice, and they're like, "Oh yeah, everything's great," and then there are some people who are quite meticulous and kind of pick apart everything you do. And I've experienced both sides, and the ones that the situations in which I feel good, the situations in which I'm told that everything's good, yeah, I feel good for maybe a few months, and then I'm like, wait a minute, this person keeps telling me this. Is there anything that I need to work on? Like, there has to be something I can work on, otherwise I'd be the best doctor in the world. At the same time, when I'm given constant feedback in which I need to improve things, I'm very much like, oh my God, I'm terrible. Like, should I even be doing this? And that's definitely something that I've thought before, and it can really destroy the confidence. And so it's all about getting that kind of balance. It's not lying necessarily, and it is best to be honest in those situations, because you're going to have a positive impact on someone kind of in the mid to long term. And sometimes that it might cause a little bit of achy pain initially, but in the long term, everyone's better off for it. It's almost in the greater good to give constructive feedback in that way. Yeah.
So when you're saying is when there's a learning opportunity, and obviously that depends on the proximity of the relationship and the nature of the relationship, and it's okay to give constructive feedback and not, even if it might hurt that person for a little bit.
So there's another thing there, and that's how you package the truth.
Yeah.
So putting
I'm gonna get to that like in a little bit. So like,
okay, we'll hold off on that.
So
yeah.
I have a specific question in relation to that. But yeah. Okay. So is that what you would say generally when it comes to constructive feedback?
I'd probably go a step further and say it's almost a responsibility. If you have something that's going to help someone, you should say it, and it might cause a bit of pain, but it's for the best. Yeah.
Okay, that's very helpful. And is lying to protect someone at a workplace okay?
Again, depends on the situation, and it depends on what you mean by protect. So. Sorry, I keep saying this. It's all grey. So what it is, in my mind, I feel like, is if you're protecting someone from a situation that you perceive is negative, and it does help them, then that's great. But if it shields them from constructive feedback, then that's another issue. If there's a situation, there's a potential for growth, and your lie helps them feel good in the short term, but then prevents their growth by hearing some constructive feedback, then that's an issue. Right. If there's a way, actually, I had a situation just last week, actually, in which one of my peers I was working with, and some of my other colleagues were kind of not happy with how things were with that person's performance. And I could have just not said anything and just said, oh, you know what, things are great. Or I could have told the truth to the bosses, who would then be a bit harder on him. What I decided to do is actually sit him down and be like, you know what, you're a peer. This is what's going on. People are not happy for this reason, and maybe you can improve in these ways. I felt the responsibility because I was a friend and I saw the opportunities for development, and I felt that I could package it in a way which would be received well and in the most constructive way.
Okay.
And so that's kind of the balance between telling the truth in certain places, and telling lies or not telling lies.
Right. And what about silence? When do you think, like, for example, when you think you know the truth, is it okay to just stay silent instead? To protect or for whatever reason?
Yeah, so again, Swami's talked about the palatable truth, and what he said is that if that truth is going to help, then speak it, and if it's not going to help, then just stay silent. And I think that's definitely something to consider. If the truth is going to be harmful, then maybe one should stay silent. The other situation that I would think about is if I'm not fully sure that that truth is actually the truth, and it's going to be potentially high impacting, then I would hold off.
Right.
For example, if, say, someone has whispered in your ear, "Oh my goodness, that person stole something," and I'm like, "Oh, that's not right. Maybe I should tell someone." But at the same time, I'm not fully sure if that person actually did it.
Yeah.
Then I would stay silent there. I'd kind of just keep it to myself, let the necessary investigations happen. If it gets to the necessary people's ears, that's great. If not, then I suppose that's what Swami wills. But I think it's important to not cause harm by saying a potential truth.
Right.
Instead, go and investigate it further.
That is very helpful, and in fact aligned with what Swami says. He says when you aren't able to utter the truth, you can desist from speaking and keep silent. And he actually illustrates this with a very clear story that I'm just going to share for the benefit of the listeners. He says once there was a sage who was doing some penance in his quest for self-realization. And then Lord Shiva, being Lord Shiva, decides, "Oh, I'm bored, let me test this sage," right? So
classic Lord Shiva.
So he comes in guise of a hunter and who's chasing a deer. And the deer passes through the place where this sage was seated and doing his penance. And so a while later, the hunter, aka Lord Shiva, approaches the sage and asks him, "Oh, have you seen a deer pass in this direction?" And the sage was obviously in this moral dilemma. If I speak the truth, the deer is going to be slaughtered. If I don't speak the truth, I'm infringing my code of conduct. So he just prays to Lord Shiva and says, what should I do? And then obviously Lord Shiva appears in, he reappears in his form, and he says, Swami reiterates that you should not utter untruth simply to escape a situation. If there is a difficulty, just be silent. So in this case, he was right not to reveal that the deer had passed, because the deer would then have been slaughtered. I thought that was interesting because it aligned with what you said about being silent when it can have a very devastating impact. But obviously, you have to look at all the other factors in the situation as well.
Yeah. I wonder if the flip side of that story is, what would have happened if the farmer had directed the hunter in the opposite direction and told a lie in that situation? It would probably would have led them away from the deer, but possibly actually led them towards other targets and maybe even caused more harm than good.
Correct. And again, the conflict here was he didn't want to lie. So if he had said that the deer was went the other direction, that would be a blatant lie. Like, it's not true. So he chose to stay silent, and then Lord Shiva and solved all his problems. But yeah, so basically across the categories that we've discussed, I'm hearing that it's essentially a balancing exercise, is what you're saying. And the various factors include the utility of what you're saying, the repercussions, the proximity of the relationship, how much harm you're going to cause, whether there's opportunity for growth. These are the kinds of factors we're looking at. And again, very much aligned with what Swami is saying. He says, before you speak, make sure there are 3 filters. Like, is it true? Objectively, is what you're saying true? And then, is it kind? So that goes to the intention of what you're saying, whether you're really trying to help someone or you just want to take a dig at this person or project your insecurities or whatever. And then 3, is it necessary? Is it really going to help somebody? So I think what you've shared, despite how great it is, has been really helpful, brother. Next question. I'm not going to lie. There are people who use this principle of truth of Swami to be blatantly frank and blunt. And to me, in a way that it just doesn't sit right. Like, Swami wouldn't want us to use honesty as a means to hurt someone, right? For example, hear comments on people's appearances or life choices that are unsolicited. So is there such a way is there a way we should be speaking the truth? And I think you were going to talk about this earlier.
Yeah, that's true. When you were giving that question just now, the first thing that popped into my mind was the one thing that should underpin absolutely everything that we do, really, and that's love. So are we able to say something lovingly? And if we're not able to say it lovingly, then why are we actually saying it? What's the intention behind it? And so that's the second thing that I was thinking of, actually, love and intention. Why are we wanting to say what we're doing? Why are we wanting to comment on this person's appearance? Is it just to kind of gloat and say that I look better than you, or I actually do you actually care about that person improving their appearance, in which you probably wouldn't kind of blatantly say out of everywhere that you look. However, you would probably say like, oh, maybe you could change this, and maybe even just help them out. In the workplace, the compliment sandwich is used, in which you say something good, something constructive, and something else good, in which you kind of uplift that person by giving positive feedback. And that's really important if the intention behind what you're saying is to actually improve someone, which it should be. So I think it comes down to what you said earlier, in which if it's going to be of use to someone, if it's going to be helping someone, then that's good. If it's going to harm, then shouldn't say it. Yeah.
Very nice, brother. And it brings me to another question. Why do you think then is lying, if it's so gray, why is it so frowned upon by Swami? What are the consequences of being, excessively or continuously untruthful?
Yeah. So I think the issue there is that, we've talked a lot until now about how nuanced it is and how it requires actually a lot of thought and consideration into why you're saying it and how you're saying it, what kind of impact it's going to have. It can be easy, I suppose, with the monkey mind that we all have sometimes, which is hard to tame. It can be easy sometimes to fall into a pattern of using lies to fuel our own ego, which then takes us further away from our ultimate goal, realizing one's own divinity. And so when in reality what we've talked about is you can use it to help. You can use it to help yourself, others, and that's in essence the big kind of danger here. And I think Swami would really like, if we were to do anything, to not want us to do that. And so I would say that that's probably why he was frowning upon it, just to make sure that we don't fall into that dangerous trap. Because there's so many ways to fuel your ego. This world is surrounded by, the world is filled with so many things and illusions in which we can indulge in. And that is, and we don't need this other thing, essentially.
Right. So it's taking us away from our true selves, and it's just because of the level of intention and consciousness you need to do this balancing exercise of whether to lie or not to lie. It's just easier to tell the truth.
Yeah.
I guess the other thing that I can think of is like diminished credibility, right? Because, I have a friend that, and this can be even in a positive way, a friend that compliments excessively and says, says the same thing to everyone, that to me it carries like, oh, you're the bestest person in the whole world. Like, how can every person be the bestest person in the whole world? Like, it carries very little weight, even though what she's saying is such a nice thing, so that credibility is so important, right? And because I just think of the example of Jacinta Ardern. The reason why they found that the reason why New Zealand handled the pandemic so well was because people just trust her leadership so much. When she implemented really stringent laws and tough rules, people were ready to comply, even though they were really harsh, because they trusted her and she had built the trust. So I think credibility is another reason why we shouldn't probably lie often. Do you think, brother?
Yeah, that's true. Because when you do, like the whole boy who cried wolf kind of scenario, hey, so the more you lie, the less someone will trust the next truth you say. And when you really want to help someone, then that your words can be a blunt instrument in the end. And you don't want that to happen.
Fantastic. And so finally, for someone who does struggle with lying to themselves or lying to others, just has gotten into this habit of lying for whatever reasons, whether it's fear or an inability to fulfill expectations, how do we overcome this habit of lying? Any practical tips?
So I think the first thing is that, so we've mentioned fear and lies being a way of basically making people think a certain way about you and what you're saying. And so I suppose the first thing is to try and develop one's self-confidence. Easier said than done, realistically, but that's going to be the core of it. The next thing is we've talked about the values underpinning everything that we say, whether it's truth or lie. And so the next thing would be to figure out what kind of person you want to be. Do you want to be a kind, loving person? Do you want to be someone who is calm? And I suppose a useful thing that I've found for myself in terms of throughout my career and all is kind of thinking of a virtual end point. Well, how do I want to look 10 years from now? And if it's a person and one would hope that it's a person that's well loved and is loving others and is happy to help and confident in every scenario. And then from there, keeping that in mind, I would say think about then what we're saying and how it's going to affect others. So is it loving? Is it serving? Is it helping? Or is it actually hurting? And so from there, in reality, the first step to trying to change something is realizing that there is actually something to be changed. And so first of all, being mindful of what it is we're saying, what kind of effect it's having, and then practicing changing what one is saying to be more truthful and more loving, and perhaps using a kind of check mechanism, like, what would Swami say? What would Mum say if they heard this? And then if you're that way inclined, what would my conscience say? Depending on how abstract you're willing to accept, depending on what level of abstract thinking you're able to accept in everyday life. That's kind of the approach that I would take. So there's a lot of mind work and a lot of reflective work, but essentially I think what we've illustrated is that if if you were to change in this way, the change needs to be central within yourself and your confidence and your thinking and your cognition. So everything really has to be reflective.
Thanks so much, Brother Nethran, for being so honest about being honest, with great practical tips. Dear listeners, it's now time for some Pradum Pills. 1. Why should we speak the truth? Well, it's just easier. The nature of lies is such that one lie leads to another. And before you know it, you are buried under a mountain of lies, not knowing who you really are. 2. Before we speak, let's ask ourselves, is this absolutely, factually true? Then let's ask, is this truth kind? What is my intention behind this statement? Is it to help? Or is it to hurt and offend? Next, let's ask, even if this truth is kind, is it necessary by virtue of my proximity or responsibility to this person? If the answer to all of the above is no, there is no harm staying silent. 3. How we speak the truth is key. Truth need not be spoken like a sharp electric fence or disguised in sarcastic humor, but instead, it should be spoken like a warm cup of hot chocolate or a loving hug. Until next Friday, happy scooping!